Now it's starting. Okay, good afternoon, good evening almost. We have just watched a movie about a new project, which is not intended for the public yet. However, you will all hear about this project firsthand from our today's lecturers, Fabien Cousteau and Yves Behar. I will introduce them shortly now. Fabien Cousteau is with us. He's an aquanaut, oceanographic explorer, and environmental advocate. He was born as the grandson of famous filmmaker and diver Jacques-Yves Cousteau and spent his early years aboard his grandfather's famous ships, learning how to scuba dive when he was only 4 years old. Today, Fabien Cousteau is well known for his study of sharks. In 2006, for example, a documentary was shown for National Geographic on TV, for which he had also created a shark submarine called Troy. In 2014, he and his team took part in the Mission 31, which was the longest science expedition to take place at the Aquarius underwater marine laboratory that is located in Florida. And in 2016, Fabien Cousteau founded the Fabien Cousteau Ocean Learning Center to fulfill his dream of creating a vehicle to make a positive change in the world. Our second speaker is Yves Behar, and he is the founder and CEO of Fuse Project. He's a designer and entrepreneur who believes that integrated product, brand, and experience design are the cornerstones of any business. Behar has pioneered design as a force for positive social and environmental change. His humanitarian work includes the One Laptop Per Child and See Better to Learn Better projects, which has distributed 6 million free corrective eyeglasses to school children in Mexico. He also received an award for this project, and he has been in the forefront of some other entrepreneurial venture designs like Formalife, August and Canopy, Cobalt, Snoo and Uber, and many others. Now, in a few minutes, all of you will hear about the current project of these two. Thank you, Fabien Cousteau, for coming and sharing your ideas, your project with us. Also, thank you, Yves Behar, for joining us and telling us about your new endeavor. Thank you, Fabien. The floor is yours.
Merci, Sandra. Thank you, Sandra. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be connecting with you. Thanks to modern technology, despite our challenges worldwide with this epidemic that's been causing us so many problems. I am so happy to be here. I hope that we'll be able to hear from Yves as well. But for those of you who don't know who our family is, and it sounds like you're too young to have seen my grandfather on TV, despite his 134 documentaries on ocean exploration back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and into the 1990s. Most of you probably weren't even born then. But that's the way I grew up. This was a background for me, something of an inspiration, something of a real live outdoor classroom. In many ways, it was more valuable for my upbringing than being in a classroom growing up, because I wasn't a particularly good student, unfortunately. I have to say this in front of students. I was paying more attention to what was going on outside the window than in the classroom. I feel very badly for saying this because my teachers were probably very good, but being out in the field was something that really enticed me, and what shaped my life, thanks to my family and the people who were with us. For the one scuba diver in this group, or at least the one that spoke up, you might know this, but for those who don't, my grandfather was responsible for co-inventing the aqualung, or the regulator, which allows for us to go scuba diving. And now we have about 3.5 million scuba divers in the world. This opened up a whole new approach in underwater exploration that stemmed from the 1940s through today. We still use this technology. He and his team also built the first underwater habitats, their first underwater houses, including Conshelf 2 or Précontinent 2, which was located in the Red Sea, where they built a whole underwater village to live for 30 days to experiment with the possibilities of human physiology, human psychological parameters, and to be able to leverage the ability to go out into the water column and do science. And so this was always something that was exciting to me. If you'll allow me, I would love to share my screen with you and speak with you and show you imagery while I'm speaking, because it's much more interesting than just watching me going like this. So hold on one second here. Hopefully I can share my screen. There we go, and sharing my screen. And I will play for you. There we go. So essentially, we were always about innovation and technology to explore a final frontier, which is our ocean. Our ocean world is representing not 72 or 73% of the planet, but 99% of our world's living space. 3.4 billion cubic kilometers of volume, within which about 90% of our world's biodiversity lives and thrives. And having been exposed to scuba diving from a very old age of 4 years old and going on expeditions since I was 7, it gave me a real appreciation for how vast and how little we know about our ocean world, even to this day. My family's always been into ocean exploration and using and inventing technologies and developing technologies or adapting technologies to go longer, deeper, and further in our ocean. And as your professor Sandra had said, I created the Fabien Cousteau Ocean Learning Center a little while ago in 2016 to be able to invite in young people, young at heart, to participate in some programs in different parts of the world. One of the things we try and incorporate in some of these programs at the Ocean Learning Center is innovative approaches to environmental challenges. For example, we use 3D printing technology to address coral bleaching. So we 3D print coral reef systems to do restoration activities to help combat the problems of climate change and other issues. We also foray into mangrove restoration. We're looking at beach cleanups and getting people involved in that and reusing those materials. As I mentioned before, of course, we're using 3D printing to do coral restoration, but the most important aspect of this, of course, is the journey, is the education, is the engagement in a way that is exciting and enticing and also informational.
Okay,
to
Fabien, you are frozen now. Is he frozen for you?
No, it's fine. You're frozen, Sandra.
Ah, okay, I'm frozen. Sorry, everything fine.
We must love this technology. It's frozen for some, working for others.
And fluid for some others. Ocean
So
Thrive.
hopefully this works okay. Please stop me if I'm going too quickly or if I'm frozen. If I'm frozen, maybe you can't stop me. I'd already be stopped. So we use also an innovative approach for sea turtle restoration, where we use women empowerment in geographic locations such as Nicaragua, where women, single mothers, for example, have been marginalized from communities. And so we're adapting our restoration activities to provide them a ways of making an income, training them in alternate sources of making a living and providing for their family, for their children, all while doing good for the environment in their own backyard. Now, Sandra had mentioned Mission 31. Mission 31 was a mission where I took my team of 5 other Aquanauts, so 6 of us, to the bottom of the sea in the only undersea marine laboratory that's remaining today, called Aquarius. You can see it probably on your right side of your screen. And it was the longest mission ever at Aquarius, one of the longest missions in general in Aquanaut history. And for those of you who may be imagining what an aquanaut is an astronaut underwater. So as opposed to scuba diving, which is a recreational activity by and large, and one that most of us can do, an aquanaut, it requires special training and a dedication to being relegated to the bottom of the sea in saturation, meaning that the pressure inside the vessel, in this case, a habitat or a laboratory, is the same as the pressure, water pressure outside. Our bodies are very adaptable to this, and it allows for us to trade our access to the topside world with access to the bottom world in unprecedented ways. It gives us the luxury of time. So instead of chatting your ear off about this, maybe I'll show you a very short video that will give you kind of a little bit of a taste of what this means. So this is Aquarius, the underwater structure with all of the residents of the coral reef swimming in and around it. It allows for human beings to stay underwater for extended periods of time as opposed to having to go back to the surface as a scuba diver. And we're able to not only live inside the laboratory, but go outside for 10, 12 hours at a time to go scuba diving and look at our wild frontier in very unique ways. The training is very much like being an astronaut. There's a lot of physical and psychological training that we need to go under so that we're able to live and work out of a very confined space of about 40 internal square meters for 6 of us for a full 31 days. But the idea is not to stay inside the habitat. It really is to look at the beauty and majesty outside, this Pandora's box of the underwater world. So I know we're pressed for time, so I'm going to keep going, but this gives us something, this platform, as opposed to an ROV, a submersible, a boat at the surface, this gives us something that is very unique to an underwater habitat, which is the gift of time. And the gift of time underwater is not to be understated, because one of the reasons why we've only explored less than 5% of our ocean world to date is because it's an extreme environment, one that's very difficult to get to, and one that doesn't have, we don't have the right tools or maybe the most advanced tools necessary to go that extra thin step into ocean exploration. We were able to also use technologies like the pulse amplitude modulated fluorometer, which is usually a technology that's used in a laboratory back on land, but adapting that to be able to look at the health of coral reef ecosystems through the fluorescence of coral. To be able to also leverage our relationships with Northeastern University, MIT, and other universities as our scientific and technology partners, we're able to look at their prototypes and use them underwater to, such as this camera, which is the Edrotronic camera, which shoots 20,000 frames a second, so that we can look at the biomechanics of organic organisms, such as the mantis shrimp and the Christmas tree worm, and replicate this in robotics, for example, or in structures. And of course, there's a lot of labor that's involved because that human technology interface is of paramount importance. We can't just send probes or AUVs down in these particular sets of scenarios, because there are a lot of very minute actions that need to happen that still require that human being to be able to perform these actions.
Everybody's been wondering what we've been doing while we've been spending hours in the water. And the thing that's been taking most of our time in the water is the plankton trap setup. So we set up these plankton traps in the afternoon, and then we collect them in the morning. And each one takes about 5 minutes to set up, and then we deploy them on 3 different substrates: coral and sponge, live rock, which means it's encrusting with anything but coral and sponge, and sand. And then in the morning, we go and we harvest the traps and cap them quickly to trap all of the plankton that has gotten in them overnight. And we send them up with the surface team, where they put them in ethanol, and then they're going to analyze all the different species of plankton that are in them.
So we get the fun of actually sorting through tens of thousands of individual organisms ashore. And right now we're doing it with a time-honored instrument. It's called a graduate student with a microscope. Looking at the plankton is one of my favorite things to do. And there's so many different phyla. These are major divisions of life on this planet that are swimming around at night, reproducing, feeding the corals. It's been found that the corals themselves, they need those plankton for an energy input at night. And if they don't get enough of it, and there's a stressful event like a warm temperature event that can lead to coral bleaching, if they don't get enough zooplankton, they actually won't make it through that event. So that's why we're monitoring the zooplankton here, which has been wonderful.
So this is just a glimpse of the daily activities that were happening both at the bottom of the sea and on the surface. And one of the aspects that was of paramount importance as well is to be able to share what was going on in real time from the bottom of the sea. We had to upgrade Aquarius's systems so that we could broadcast live for the first time from the bottom of the sea with Wi-Fi. We were able to do this through Skype in the classroom sessions and such, social media essentially. And that really engaged over 100,000 students from around the world, all 6 continents, to see what these crazy aquanauts were doing. And we were able to look at, for example, that big giant grouper that you saw in one of the shots, the booming behavior that creates a cavitation bubble hotter than the surface of the sun for a very split second. And the pressure waves that it creates in its hunting approaches allowed for us to really bring in young people and people who are curious, who may never have otherwise looked at the ocean in any other way but maybe vacation. And so it gave us a real good platform and a real good sense to do and execute all the things that we tried to do, despite the fact that Aquarius is so small and is actually 30 years old last year. So it's a bit of a dinosaur. We were able to do over 3 years worth of scientific research in that 31 days. Now, that said, imagine if we had a state-of-the-art undersea marine laboratory akin to the International Space Station. Imagine the kinds of things that we could be afforded if we didn't have to have so much surface support, if we could be more self-sufficient, if we could cater to a larger group of people with a larger amount of internal volume so that we could stay longer than 31 days. We had a lot of challenges at Aquarius. Our tight spaces, the fact that we had to upgrade some of the technologies, the fact that we had to fix some of these things while we were executing Mission 31, and the fact that this is an extreme environment, a very dangerous situation if some of your life support fails, for example. We had to make sure that in the future, we could dream of something much, much more advanced. And it's with that you saw that first video of Proteus. So Proteus was born out of Mission 31. And it aims to address some of the most fundamental needs of ocean exploration to create the International Space Station underwater. And with that, I'd like to show you a glimpse of Proteus, which is this. Proteus is meant to not be 40 internal square meters, but 400 internal square meters, to be able to cater to 2 state-of-the-art undersea marine laboratories, which will allow for us to do the vast majority of the science right there on site, instead of bringing those samples back to the surface where they inevitably get changed and potentially corrupted, where they inevitably get stored in lockers for weeks, months, years before a scientist can get to it, so that we can look at solutions, for example, for viral pandemics or cancer research or pain mitigation or biomechanics and so on and so forth. New challenges to engineering so that we could look at the anecdote for space colonization, for example. And so it's with that that we are endeavoring to create this epic project with Yves, who I had the fortunate luck to meet at a group that we both are involved with called Helena. Helena Foundation is gathering a group of people who are maybe unusual thinkers, maybe more likely people who don't take the word impossible as anything but a challenge. And I'm a firm believer that the word impossible should not be used, because it's just an excuse for most people not to do anything. And when we're facing the most fundamental challenge our species has had in its entire history on this planet, for the future trajectory and well-being of our children, for the future well-being of our life support system, which is our ocean. Our ocean provides us with every other breath that we take, all the things that we take for granted, whether it's a glass of water, whether it is the food that we eat, whether it is just the well-being that it gives us. It is quite literally the circulatory system of this planet that allows for us to live and thrive. And so it stands to reason that we need to do more ocean exploration, and to say that it is impossible is absolutely ridiculous. And I'm a firm believer that we can build the International Space Station underwater, or better yet, a network of them, to have a better finger on the pulse of our oceanic health, and therefore make better decisions more efficiently, more quickly. And for that, we need a lot of new design prowess, adaptation of engineering that's happened and design that's happened in space exploration, and of course, creating new approaches to technological challenges because of the parameters of this extreme environment, this hostile environment, if you will, of salt water and ambient pressure. Something that is very exciting, something that I think with Proteus, if you look at some of the articles that came out between CNN and Reuters and NPR and all these things, will give you a better picture than I can in 20 minutes. But essentially, having the ability to dock submarines, deploy AUVs, and of course personnel out into that water column to explore our life support system is extraordinarily exciting to me, and definitely highly possible. As a matter of fact, it will happen. And we expect Proteus to be that next fin step in ocean exploration. So I'm going to try and tone down my excitement a little bit and pass my baton back to your professor. But if you have any questions or anything, I don't know if we have time at the end, I'd be happy to answer them. I know I went through a lot of information very quickly, so thank you very much. Sandra, back to you.
Thank you, Fabien. We have a few questions already in the chat. Linda, I think you have been the first one. Would you like to start?
Yeah, actually, hi. Thank you for being tonight here with us. It's really great information what you're presenting here. Is an honor. Actually, it just like my mind got stuck in the project you had with the single moms in Nicaragua. And I found it very beautiful as a project. And I was just thinking if that concept would apply as well, like in Europe, not only like so far back from home.
That's an excellent question. And we try and take every situation and cater to that situation specifically, because there's no panacea solution, whether it's environmental or social or economic. And the short answer is yes, of course, there's probably a way to adapt this to situations in different parts of Europe. It depends on the need, depends, of course, on the economic infrastructure that's available for this. And ultimately, at least for us, for the Ocean Learning Center and for the programs, our ultimate goal is to become obsolete, meaning that we've achieved our goals and that local community no longer needs us as a management system, as a crutch, as a platform. They have been, they're capable and given the tools to do it themselves.
So they have been
the
kind
short
of
answer is,
educated. So they would,
yes.
they are kind of like, they have been educated to the concept and they embraced it. Okay. No, because it was funny that it was so far away back from home. And I was like, does it have something to do with our mentality in Europe, that maybe people abroad are a bit more open and more embracing to this kind of concept? That's why I just.
It's an excellent question. And you're right. I mean, you know, society and cultures are very different. Sensitivities are very different. Needs are very different. In the case of Nicaragua and El Salvador, where we've worked, the average education is fourth grade. Fourth grade in France is la dixième. Was it
High school?
10th grade?
Yeah, high school.
It's
should
no,
be,
no.
right?
Fourth grade is like 9 years old.
Yeah,
After 9
elementary
years
school.
old,
Okay.
they go and work in the fields. So this is a very big challenge because you know, science is not necessarily something they know much about. Higher order training is not something that they necessarily know about for certain communities. But we're working with the most disadvantaged communities, and we're trying to give them the tools necessary. My grandfather told me when I was young, people protect what they love what they understand, and they understand what they're taught. And so education and that knowledge is the most important thing for people to make better decisions for themselves and, of course, for the area.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda. Then we have a question from Felix.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Sorry, my camera isn't working.
Okay.
My question would be if there are any cooperation, if there's any cooperation between your project with Proteus and any space agencies, like trading experiences or sharing knowledge or whatever. Yeah, that's my question.
Bonjour, Felix. My nephew's name is Felix, so I have a particular fondness for that name. And the short answer is yes. The longer answer is it's a little too early to announce who it is exactly, but it is based, they are based in Europe. And so there's a very real synergistic opportunity to work together with outer space and inner space for engineering as well as design and exploration, because a lot of the anecdotes that are happening in the ocean can be applied for space exploration as well. And I think those agencies are well attuned to that. And so we are working currently under the shadows, so to speak, for now. They will be announced soon with some space agencies and engineers in Europe.
And what are those similarities, or where do the challenges differ a lot? Would you say?
They're both a lot of similarities and a lot of differences, and the challenges of extreme environments do have some very fundamental similarities. Whether you're an aquanaut or an astronaut, you're far from what one would call a familiar safe space. And although we deal underwater with water, with salt water, with varying pressures, the movement, the calculated actions of every day, the decisions, the working with robots, working with technologies, in those extreme environments, in underwater colonies, actually are good training grounds. As a matter of fact, NASA still uses Aquarius for their NEMO missions because of the similarities. They train their astronauts, and as a matter of fact, astronauts first have to become scuba divers before they get trained to go into space. So there are a lot of similarities there. There are differences as well. Now, in space, we don't know what to expect other than a lack of gravity or different gravities, depending on if you're colonizing the moon or Mars or Europa. But with that, it's a good platform to train aspiring astronauts to expect the unexpected, whether it's mechanical failures, electronic failures, human fallibilities. You know, being in an extreme environment in a confined space, you need to have mental fortitude. You need to be proactive in solution building on the fly, and you need to be able to physically also deal with these physically exerting activities. So there's a lot of similarities in this. There are differences, but there are more similarities than differences. I see Yves popped on.
Yves,
Salut.
Behar.
Ça va?
Hello, everybody. This
Nice
is
to
highly,
meet you.
this is very, very embarrassing, but I guess this little chat with you all was not on my schedule, so I got some alarm bells when I saw it. Sorry about this.
Perfect timing. We were just chatting about some of the things that I just wrapped my presentation, and we were going through the Q&A. So this is actually perfect timing.
Thank you, Fabien.
Yves, I have introduced you as well as Fabien, but would you like to say a few sentences about yourself, why you joined this project and what is your part?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I've always been very connected to the oceans. But for me and my family, it's more of an acquired taste. It's not like Fabien's history and family story, where this has been in his lineage. For me, I grew up in Switzerland, and as soon as I got my driver's license, I went to the ocean, and I spent you know, the last 30 years or so, always very close to the ocean. And so whenever there is an opportunity to put my design skills and my team skills towards conservation, towards sustainability, towards ocean protection, I jump at the opportunity. So I got to meet Fabien probably about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, and I heard his mission to sort of bring a space station-like energy to oceans research and conservation. And you know, there are many projects that are a yes, but this one was a very, very easy yes. In terms of getting involved and supporting Fabien's vision. Can you hear me okay?
Thank you very much, Yves. Any questions for Yves? Fabien just answered the questions about the legs. Maybe Eric, you would like to phrase your question.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
Sandra, I went straight to you, the answer. Someone had asked me about the legs of Aquarius and of Proteus, so I'll just repeat, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to repeat my answer, which was for the legs, the reason why Proteus and Aquarius and pretty much every other structure or most other underwater habitats have had legs is for minimizing the environmental impact. In some cases, it's the ability to compensate for bottom shift of the substrate. access to the bottom, a deployment of the, because you have to remember, this is basically a cup upside down, right? So the air is trapped inside. So it's the ability of going ingress and egress for, or entry and exit of the Aquanauts, of any other technology that you may be deploying. Maintenance also, because this is a corrosive environment, so you need to make sure that biofouling and all this is off the structure. And of course, for emergencies, in case there's a big emergency and you have to exit the structure, your exit would be at the bottom of the structure, because for obvious reasons, for physics reasons. So anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That was actually the question I had about the legs, and a follow-up question to that, or included, was how was it assembled? Was it like built as a huge part and then lowered down into the ocean, or built prefabricated small parts that you yourself, while underwater, sort of assembled it?
Great question, Eric. So depending on the structure we're talking about, for Aquarius itself, Aquarius was built at the surface in a shipyard, and then floated over to its destination on a barge and sunk down with 100 tons of weight. And that's the 40 square meter, 45 square meter of internal space. So there's a certain lift to that. But the structure itself is also made with traditional materials, so steel and other materials, mainly metal alloys. With regard to Conch Shelf 2, it was built in sections, floated to its destination, and the sections were sunk to the bottom. Then they put air inside them, and all the life support and everything else. So that was a different approach. Both approaches have been used.
And is it just about like how big it is that determines which method you use, or is it other aspects as well that determine how to get it down?
Yeah, it's certainly an engineering exercise. And depending on how big or small and how heavy, how buoyant, how complex and fragile the structure is. For example, with Proteus, the idea is to bring down the main section and being able, because of its modularity, the design that Yves has back here behind me, let me see, right there, those sections right there, which look like coral polyps. Those sections can be added and subtracted, brought to the surface, modified, upgraded. You can also expand the size of the habitat. You can add on to the structure. So this gives us a lot of flexibility in installation and also in upgradability down the road.
Okay, thank you very much for the answers.
But I'm sorry, Yves, you should probably answer that question.
Maybe
Well,
the next time.
Yeah, I mean, the structure, sort of thinking about the structure as a cohesive habitat with the ability to expand in the circumference, to add the pods in the circumference, is something that we discussed with very early on with Fabien, which is how do we add over time? How does it continue to become technologically relevant? How does it adapt to different research, different universities and private groups that want to study new things or different things underwater? So the ability to expand and add is critical, and it's for the same process with the space station. There's new equipment, new needs, and that flexibility, even though it's quite challenging to do, it's quite challenging to exchange pods, etc. underwater. It is what dictated essentially the architecture, that center, common space and labs, as well as the pods that are added on the outside.
I mean, it's taking a page out of the International Space Station, essentially, and inviting other countries to add modules as needs be. I mean, this is a fabulous idea that really invites the world to participate.
So I had a question. I'm Deborah Maricino. I work with both Fabien and Yves. So I'll interject and ask a question just because I've heard this story a bit, but I think it's a nice one to share. Yves, if you could talk a little bit about your inspiration for the design, how it came to you. I know you had a really interesting process as you were coming up with the designs. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Yes. I mean, Fabien and I, it really, the discussions we had early on were really about creating a dream, that is both realistic, but also futuristic. And we needed to create very strong iconography because, how do you get people's attention when going to space is such a fascinating endeavor, and astronauts are such an exciting sort of a visual sort of historical part of our culture. So how do we create the same kind of excitement for aquanauts, for research of our oceans, which are 95% yet to be discovered? And so we were really we looked at science fiction. We looked at some of the earlier visions from the 60s and 70s about what living underwater would be like. And of course, those are very sort of the time. And so we needed to imagine what would be an iconography for the 21st century, and something that would rally the attention, the excitement of the whole world for and rally the energy that we need to put into our oceans. And so the basic architecture needed to be something that creates that kind of fascination and excitement that makes you want to be there, that makes you want to experience it, whether you're experiencing it physically or virtually, since Fabien has planned a whole communication lab, inviting classes, inviting visits, virtual visits into Proteus while science is taking place there. So the way we thought about both the architecture and the constraints really came hand in hand. One major element is, how do we allow as much light at 60 feet underwater? It's certainly darker, but there's still light coming from the surface. So how do we allow as much natural light to still come into the structure? Because it's very much part of how we as humans, how we orientate ourselves, natural light, sunlight. And so the idea was to create two volumes that are circular and that are on top of each other and offset, because that gives us surface on both floors to have skylights and more light coming through. So the two volumes are offset, and the connection between those two volumes is this ramp, this slow incline ramp that connects the two spaces. And there is a reason for that ramp. We could have put a staircase straight up, or we could have had a staircase down the middle. But the ramp creates the opportunity for everyone underwater to move more, to exercise more. So it's the two circular spaces are both ways that we keep the different teams and the social life very active. This is something that Fabien and I talked about, because he's the one who spent 31 days underwater and light and socializing and having a comfortable and welcoming environment is very important. you know, as a furniture designer and as a designer of office furniture, it's always been very clear that better work environments create better outcomes. So that was one of the criterias. The socializing, the fact that these two spaces, both the bottom and the top one, are circular. That means that people work together, they see each other, they see what's going on, they can interact in the kitchen upstairs. You know, it's a beautiful kitchen, a beautiful way to bring people together. Or they can interact downstairs where the submarine is located, and where a lot of the wet labs are located. So an architecture that speaks of socializing, an architecture that speaks of movement and light, and one that speaks of expansion, of adding elements all around. So those were all the starting points, and then it took a lot of sketching, a lot of mock-up making, a lot of understanding the sort of technical constraints about building, about life underwater, and about building for life underwater. You know, it got us to the current results.
Let me add context to this, and it may answer some of the questions in the feed. So when you become an aquanaut, whether it's 20 meters or 200 meters, it for the sake of conversation doesn't really matter, because essentially you cannot go to the surface because of nitrogen issues. So the bends, if you will. Essentially what that means is if you do go to the surface within 15 minutes, you're going to start exhibiting some very serious signs of paralysis and death. So not recommended. But by giving up that access of time, access to the topside world, temporarily speaking, and before you desaturate, you're able to go into the water column depending on your depth for indefinite periods of time. For example, at 20 meters, you can go out 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if you like. The limits to those parameters are that you get tired, you get cold, you get hungry, you need to go to the bathroom. But aside from the human aspects of those aspects of things, it allows for that outside world. When, as an aquanaut, you function in your daily activities, which are very regimented for security reasons, you burn 3 times as many calories. And as Yves was saying about the kitchen, or the galley, as we call it on a ship or on a underwater vessel, the galley, the food that you eat is very much astronaut food. It's freeze-dried food because of the parameters that you're functioning in. You're at 3 atmospheres of pressure inside, meaning 3 times as much oxygen. Therefore, you can't cook with open flame. So no traditional ways of cooking. So that means that you have to reconstitute food with hot water, which you either get from the surface or you get from other means of warming water that are not open flame or open heat source, microwave, for example. Or you are eating foods that you may have cultivated underwater, aquaculture, for example, raw foods. Or occasionally you get care packages from the surface. But those foods don't last very long, those fresh foods, lettuce, apples, etc., go bad after a day or 2 days at most, because again of the oxidation of this thing. So these are all things you have to think about when you're in an extreme environment. Additionally, when you go out into the water column and work 10 to 12 hours or what have you, your body gets cold, you're working very hard underwater because of the resistance of water. Inside the habitat, your body tries to stay warm, so you are burning 3 times as many calories, therefore you have to eat 3 times as much of that horrible astronaut food, or camping food, if you will. But essentially, those things have to be addressed in the structure, in the design. Because you're working so hard, because this is a lot of exertion, mental and physical exertion, the inside of the habitat, and this is Yves' magic, has to be conducive to something familiar, something comfortable, something that allows for enough space so that you don't feel on top of each other all the time, because neuroscience has proven that rats in a cage, for example, start attacking each other if they don't have enough space, enough food, etc. And it's the same thing with human beings, maybe more sophisticated, but essentially the same thing. So we need that space, we need that sense of comfort, we need that sense of not only community, but our own little space to be able to get away from it all, as well as functioning properly. And with Proteus, as opposed to any of the previous habitats, which housed 1 person, 2 people, 4 people, 6 people, Proteus is going to eventually house 12 people, so a much larger crew, and therefore we need to emphasize all those things, including, of course, the light sources and those things that give us a sense of well-being, as much as being efficient and all those other parameters that we need to look at as well. So I hope I answered most of the questions in that thread, all in one swoop.
Fabien, we know you have 8 minutes left. Martin, Alma, Eric, please, whoever is first.
I can go first. I have 2 questions. The first one would be, how do you import oxygen? And the second one would be, how many sleeping quarters are there, and how do they look like?
Excellent, excellent. I'm sorry, Alma, I didn't cover those. I will leave the architecture and the design to Yves, but I will tell you, 12 people, therefore 12 sleeping quarters. But Yves can dive more into the design and all those aspects. As far as importing oxygen, as expedition divers, we often use something called a rebreather, which is different from scuba, in the sense that scuba is a one-way. It's one way when you breathe. You breathe in from the tank and you exhale, and it goes into the environment. With a rebreather, you rebreathe your air, and so there's an injection of oxygen in every breath you take, and there's a scrubbing material that takes the CO2 out of that breathing loop. Essentially, a habitat is more or less the same thing in a much, much larger volume. And so the oxygen that is provided to us can be done multiple ways. And again, I'm trying not to say too much because I want Yves to really chime in here. But essentially, you can bring it in from the surface. You can generate it through technology on site, which is a little bit more complex, definitely more dangerous, potentially dangerous. And at the same time, you have that scrubbing capability to take the CO2 out that's being generated by all these people in a bubble, essentially. And these are the same challenges that NASA, that the European Space Union, that others in space colonization exercises are looking at as well. But if you have what do you call it, the parameters perfect, then you have a balanced system, and that's what you have to constantly monitor, and hence why you need three engineers down at Proteus during missions. So with that, Yves, what does the inside look like, and what other parameters did I miss in that?
So the inside looks great, but currently we would rather not share the renderings or the photos of the interior part. But it uses a lot of recycled materials. You cannot use certain natural materials such as wood, for example, because of the humidity and the changes of humidity throughout. But if I can describe a little bit, the kitchen is an open kitchen with the kind of technologies or the kind of cooking that Fabien describes. There is sort of a large area where people can eat together, as well as socialize together with a couch, a large couch. And again, all the materials are sort of carefully chosen for their sustainability, but also for their ability to survive long-term, you know, in an underwater environment. As far as the pods and where people sleep, so the pods are the perfect sleeping quarters because it's a separate environment. We have between 2 and 4 people per pod sleeping and sharing that environment. It's actually quite nice to be in the pod because as you notice from the drawings that I mean from the renderings that Fabien had in his background, the lights, the window is angled upwards, which means that you have a view up towards the light and towards what's happening above in the ocean. But the pods are quite comfortable at that size for 2 or 4 people to sleep in bunk beds.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Alma. We have probably time for 1 or 2 more questions.
I actually, if you allow me, I was up with the second question, and actually I thought it's not important, but due to Mr. Cousteau said that actually the astronauts, in order to be able to go on a mission, on a space mission, they have to actually be kind of aquanauts first. I would really try to remake the question: what are the steps, the preparation steps of an aquanaut, which are unknown to ordinary people? Like, how do they deal with the pressure, and how, what's like the education?
So
thank you.
Yes, of course. I can speak on behalf of my experiences with Aquarius and their protocols, and I could probably give you insight on what our protocols will be for Proteus, which will be probably even more challenging, simply because we're going to be deploying a larger group of people for longer periods of time. For Aquarius, it's 3 weeks of training. Actually, it's about a month of training, where coming up to that month, you have routine exercises. Being young and fit, all of you, you probably have no problem passing the physical. But for us older people, older than 20, you know, making sure that we're healthy, that we don't have any major health issues, whether it's cardiac arrest or any history of issues of any consequence, is of paramount importance. Being able to pass the physical trials, which are including taking an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and only being able to use a mask of your choosing, and swimming the length of the swimming pool over and back in one breath underwater is one of the tests. And treading water and all these other things, of course, as well. And those are all in controlled environment preparation for the real tests in the field, which are taking, first of all, you have to be able to be trained as a scuba diver and have a number of hours under your belt. For Aquarius, I think it's 100 hours. For us, it would be more. But essentially, after this, you need to do 3 weeks of training underwater. Some of the training will include dives of an hour or more without a mask, and finding your way to the habitat with your partner. Some will include not being able to see at all, finding the guidelines. And these are all to simulate emergencies, of course. Some will be to be able to, how quickly you can put your gear on and get out of Aquarius. Some will be the psychological parameters, meaning how comfortable you are in very tight environments. There are exercises where you go to the bottom with a hard hat, a helmet, and you intentionally flood the helmet. The helmet is where you breathe and everything else. And then you intentionally flood the helmet. You wait 15, 20 seconds, and then you go through the exercise of unflooding your helmet, meaning there are several knobs on the helmet where you take the water out. And these are some of the common exercises that are happening through that month. With Proteus, we'll have some similar parameters, but they'll be more extensive and adapted to that particular location in Curaçao, as well as the physical space of Proteus, which will be different than Aquarius. This is just in the unlikely event that something happens. I had almost an incident during Mission 31 where one of my Aquanauts was passed all the tests, but he was going a little, he was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the tight space inside the habitat, and he was more than ready to go to the surface. So we had to switch him out in the middle of our operations with one of our backup Aquanauts. And this avoided any problems, but unfortunately, unfortunately, he couldn't complete the mission. But we wanted to avoid any potential issues with him going crazy, essentially. And these are very, very real issues with space colonization, because there's no option of leaving once you're there. So this is something that was an inconvenience for us for a day, but very important for Proteus.
Who wants to try any of these tests?
Oh my God. That's like really challenging. And the part where you said that actually he passed all the physical and psychological tests, but then in the end he wasn't able to cope, is like really, one can't say until is faced with the situation, I guess. And it really like compliments to you that means that you're pretty fit and pretty prepared, because you are like an Aquanaut. So it's like huge. It like sounds like a huge thing. So wow.
I have a few too many nitrogen bubbles in the brain, but I wouldn't ask anybody, any of my team, to do something I'm not willing to do myself. With regard to what happened on Aquarius and Mission 31, those were not our rules or regulations, and that's why I want to make sure that now that we pushed the limits in Aquarius. No one, NASA had done 17 days at Aquarius. We did 31. It wasn't to break the record, but it was because I wanted to be down there for a full lunar cycle for science. But the people at Aquarius said that was impossible. Well, we proved them wrong, but we also learned a lot in the process and things that we would change with Proteus.
Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Fabien. Yves, do we have 2 minutes left?
Sure.
Can I, because what I would like to know as an architect and research on habitabilities now, how did you counter with your design for the new station? What did you build in order to eliminate or balance those psychological upraisings due to this conditions in living in this isolation? Did you include anything particular from a design point of view, architecture point of view?
So we certainly, talked, Fabien and I, a lot and brainstormed a lot about isolation and about semi-darkness and how to compensate for that. And the circular spaces that are stacked on top of each other give you really a lot of opportunity to change your environment, to go see people, to be in contact with people, in those circular spaces, you can't really hide or feel isolated, because there are people working around you, there are people living around you, and a lot of the sort of furniture and arrangements and sort of interior design elements are really encouraging people to come together. It's like a family kitchen. It's a dining room or eating space that everybody can be a part of. I would say even the communication lab is encased in glass on the second floor and allows people to see both what's going on in the background, people who are virtually looking at Proteus, but also for people inside to see the activity. So I think part of what makes people feel less isolated is seeing other people working, seeing other people doing things, being able to look over people's shoulders and work collaboratively, input, be curious. Even if it's not your project, you can still see what else is going on. And so really the circular architecture, the two circular elements, allow for both socializing, but also variety, because different things happen on the second floor versus the first floor. So you're not just seeing a singular element, or a singular room, the same room all the time. You can move around, move up and down within the structure, probably dozens of times a day. So we feel like that's an architecture that's anti-isolation, anti-loneliness in many ways.
Wonderful answer. Thank you, Yves. Thank you, Fabien. I think this is a good conclusion to your project. I'm very much looking forward to see it happen, to see the first images, to see the first missions, the first videos. Wishing you all the best, and thank you both for sharing your experience and knowledge with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you, everybody.
Merci,
Thank you.
merci, merci tout le monde. Thank you, everyone.
Merci à vous.
Merci, au revoir.
Big pleasure.